Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant. Today, I'm going to be covering this book, Deep Creek. The subtitle is Finding Hope in the High Country. The author is Pam Houston, and the copyright is 2019. The book design was by Fjarn Cutler de Vik. The cover design is by Rachel Willie. The cover photograph from the author, Pam Houston. And the author photograph is from Michael Blakeman. I picked this book up at Tattered Cover back in December of 2022, but I didn't get around to reading it until 2024. It sat on the lowest shelf of this bookcase for about a year and a half. I went into this book with some anticipation. It does have a piece of praise by Craig Childs, who I have read, and I may get around to ranting about one of the two books of his that I have. Well, one of the three books of his that I have. One of the two books that I've read. And I don't remember ever reading any of the other authors who praised this. What I appreciated about this book is that it's from a part of the country that I really appreciate. It's from the mountains from which flow the Rio Grande. And it's a really beautiful stretch of mountains. I loved going off trail the one time I was out there. I really, really love reading about it. It's also the same part of Colorado, those same mountains where Rick Bass searched for grizzlies back in the 80s, I want to say it was. So it's a portion of the state that is near and dear to me, a portion of the country that is near and dear to me. I think it's not as beautiful as the mountains in New Mexico, but it's pretty close, and it has a lot more moisture, and so is kind of more humid, but also more forested in a way that I appreciate. Another thing I appreciate about this book is that I keep on my notes app a note titled Authors Mentioning Other Authors. And in previous books, I've mentioned those allusions and references, such as how in The Soul of an Octopus, Cy Montgomery mentions Liz Thomas as a friend, this being Elizabeth Marshall Thomas, who wrote The Hidden Life of Deer, which was one of the first books I ranted about on this channel. Or Rick Bass mentioning a couple of the people he had encountered. And one of the more recent additions to this note says, Pam Houston of Deep Creek mentions friendship with Terry Tempest Williams, and she also went on a trip with John Vaillant, the author of The Tiger. And I don't think they went on the trip knowing each other, but they both signed up for a trip and then ended up their paths crossing. So, kind of interesting interaction there. This book features the memoir of the author who, after a big publication in which she got a pretty good paycheck, she finally moved out of the rental situation she was living in near the southern part of Colorado and moved into a house that she had recently bought. And this she bought with a pretty big loan, but the people nearby were very happy to see the property being lived in and the property being maintained by someone who very clearly appreciates the region and wants the property to remain as it is. It's an old cabin that has been added onto by descendants of the original settlers there. And it's an interesting situation because at one point in time someone tries to buy her property, and this is at a point where the author is at a low point in her life, but the loan grantor, the person that works at the bank that gave her the loan in the first place, the loan that she's still paying off, doesn't turn in the check because in her eyes the person that's buying it is kind of an ass and no one in the town likes her, and everyone in the town would prefer that Pam Houston remain the owner. So it's probably wrong for her to have withheld that check, but when Pam Houston comes around and says, no, I would rather live here in debt than sell the place and move on, the town kind of stands by her decision, and the check is misplaced or something. The deal is off. Thankfully, the check was not turned in, the payment was not made, and so she continues to own this property. And this book, like a lot of other memoirs I've read, involves a canine partner that the author is very close to and whose friends really know the dog well as well. So it's one of those books where there is that scene where the dog dies, everyone comes together and celebrates the dog's life rather than focusing on the misfortune of the death, which is one thing that I feel is kind of a, at least in my eyes, a kind of Catholic perspective on death. I know some other cultures will, and some other religions, Christian or otherwise, will focus on the sadness and grief of the death rather than the joy of the life lived. And that felt really interesting to read because there is that grief that my friend is going to die, I am going to have to put him down, but everyone enjoys the memories of this dog on their last night together. So, a really interesting moment. There's a prominent section of this memoir that focuses on a fire. It opens up the chapter Diary of a Fire with a quote from the USDA Forest Service website, and then it opens up, on June 5th, 2013, lightning strikes a dead Engelmann spruce in the San Juan National Forest near Wolf Creek Pass in a direct line south from the ranch up and over the Continental Divide. The smoke plume the resulting fire ignites is too thin and distant for me to see from my kitchen window, probably 15 miles as the crow flies, so I don't know about it yet. The spring of 2013 has been the driest in more than a decade. The region has had very little precipitation in April and none whatsoever in May. While the rest of the country has exploded into summer activity, we've hunkered down at home, rationed our water, watched the horizon. We've had 10 red flag days since May 20th, and I can feel the whole valley holding its breath. On June 7th, the West Fork Fire makes its first appearance on the internet when it is only a quarter acre in size. The Archuleta Emergency Management website, receiving its information from the Durango Interagency Fire Dispatch, reports that the West Fork Fire, started by lightning on Monday, June 5th, is burning in a rugged and remote area of heavy, down dead and standing bug-kill timber at 10,850 feet in elevation. And then the rest of that chapter is about constantly keeping an eye on the fire, constantly keeping an eye on the evacuation procedure, and trying to tend to their animals. And at this point, she does have some animals on the property that she needs to evacuate because some animals can't really take shelter from the fire. So it's just a fascinating snapshot of living in southern Colorado. And some of this, while I was reading it in 2024, felt very familiar because in the 2024 Ruidoso wildfires, a lot of people had horses up there that needed to be evacuated. And one of my coworkers, who has a horse trailer and some stables on her property, spent 2 days going back and forth up and down the mountain, allowed past the fire blockade, so that way she could get to properties that had horses and board them at her property, and obviously for no charge, because it's an emergency and because everyone understands the horses' lives matter more than any money in the situation. And from what I remember, there was some compensation in that the people whose horses were rescued ended up buying feed to keep them healthy. But that's one of those things like, paying gas money instead of paying for the entire trip. So I was reading that portion when it was relevant to events going on in my own vicinity and my own life. And I just really appreciate this kind of work. It's a fascinating read. I don't think it's the kind of memoir I genuinely I don't think it's the kind of it's not the kind of memoir that I normally go out of my way to read. I picked this up because it was about Southern Colorado, and I thought it would be about something that it wasn't. I thought, given the cover, that it would be about the environment, but it wasn't really. And some of this also discusses the personal life of the author, traumas experienced, the lives of their parents, the way their parents interacted with them, so on and so forth. It's always that these people come from a background of trauma, and their way of processing it is by becoming a writer and expressing themselves for others to see and read. And in that regard, I appreciate this book. I don't think I'm ever going to get around to rereading it, but it is a memoir that I really liked, and I think, I don't really give out a 1 to 10 rating scale, but it's not high enough that I'm going to reread it. It's not bad enough that I am panning it and just telling everyone to stay away. It's good. I appreciate it, and that's really all most books can ask for. It's the rare books that become a part of a person's life. So this book was fun. It is always nice to see authors mentioning other authors, and at this point I could have a web, like one of those conspiracy boards on this wall right next to me that just goes over Gary Paul Nabin referenced by this guy references this person, David Quammen knows Edward Abbey, who knows Doug Peacock, who knows Rick Bass knows Terry Ten. Like, I could put together a giant web of all of this. But, that's a project for when I finally commit to it. And this book will contribute to it by adding another aspect to it. So, it is a good memoir. I think if people like the Southern Rockies, the Four Corners region, that may be a good book to read. Now, I paid about $16, $17 for this, and I think I got my money's worth out of it, but I don't think I'm going to reread it. So this will go back into the used book marketplace, probably at Coas, to earn me credit for another book. So yeah, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant.